So, welcome to the tech track of Easy Engage. Today we'll go through several topics for this event. You've probably already seen it in the other track, but in terms of going over it again, we have with us today talk about Easy Platform version 3 and how to take advantage of it. As opposed to earlier versions. We also have Felipe, so that is Vidar Langseid from Ibexa. We also have multi-site development with Easy Platform, done by Felipe Jarmillo from Applica. And lastly, we have Getting the Most Out of Symfony 5 with Nicholas Grekas from Symfony. With you today, the host, me being Andre Remke. I'm VP Technical Services and Support at Ibexa. Some practical info before we start. Sessions will be recorded, it's recorded already, and we will provide access to that afterwards in case you need to see something again. There will be a Q&A after, during the talk using the Q&A function here on Zoom. We will also do 5 minutes at the end answering questions if there are any on each and every talk. And if you want to do some social media posts, please use our hashtag IbexaEngage2020. So first up for this technical track is Vidar Langseid, professional services consultant at Ibexa. And I guess we are ready to start. Let me just skip you the screen, Vidar.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope you can see my screen now. So I am going to talk to you about taking advantage of Easy Platform version 3 and some of the new things you can do there. My name is Vidar Langseid. I work as a professional service consultant at Ibexa. I have been working in the company for quite some years, but now I'm working on with professional services. Lately, I've been working quite a bit with helping clients migrating from Easy Publish and Easy Publish platform to Easy Platform. And now in the near future, I will likely also help people to migrate from version 2 to version 3 or upgrade from version 2 to version 3. But let's dive straight into the things we're going to talk about. So what's new in Easy Platform version 3? Some of the first thing you might notice when you install it is that the directory structure is quite different from earlier versions, and that is related to the adoption of Symfony version 5. But besides that, we also made a lot of other things to improve the developer experience. We have simplified APIs, added more flexibility and configurations, things like this, which I will now go into step by step. One thing we have actually removed from this version is signals and slots. Instead, we have replaced that with standard Symfony events. So the application now triggers 2 events for most operations, or if not all, one before and one after the actual operation. And the list of the events are available here. It's quite long list. We can, for instance, go to publish version event, which we'll have here, and we'll also have one before Where were you? Before publish event. Another thing which is different with singles and slots is that the events themselves would contain objects, not only IDs to reference things. So for instance, you will actually get the content object here, not only an ID of the content object, which is an improvement on the developer experience. The APIs are now site access aware by default. This was actually possible also in 2.5, but now it is, then you have to enable it explicitly. Now it's there by default. And it means, for instance, that when you are fetching content, the system or the API will automatically, based on which site access you are in, for instance, know which languages it should fetch. Or you will also be aware of any other site access specific configuration. So previously you would need to have the config resolver for this. So you would either need to inject the config resolver or get it from the container. So when you loaded some content, you will, in order to get to know what kind of languages are applicable for this very site access, you will then need to use the config resolver and the get parameter to fetch the languages and pass that into the load content method. But as you see on the right side here, it's now a lot easier and a lot less code. We also added a few getters to make life a bit easier. So for instance, content info is an object you will work a lot with when you're working with the API. And if you have that content info object and you needed to get the content type, previously, if you needed to do that, you would need to use the content type service. So if you see on the second last line on this slide, you will use the content type service and then use the load content type method, where the parameter will be the content type ID, which you will have from the content info. But now you can get it directly from the content info as shown. So quite a few of these methods will be handy. So I like to mention content type and get parent location. I can also imagine will be something you may use a lot. The API, the REST API, has got a completely new online reference documentation. So it's available here. So for instance, if you want to see how to load some content, you can see it like this, where it says the resource or URL you can use to do that. It takes a parameter, content ID. It documents the headers you may choose to use. For instance, you can use accept header with content or with content info, which I just talked about. Or if you want to have the return result in XML or JSON. And you also have examples of the result or the response in XML format. And if you want to change, for instance, update some content on the meta information, you can click on the patch and you will see the corresponding documentation for when using the patch method to the very same resource. We have created new search criteria or new filters. So for instance, you can now search for content objects that represents a user account. You can get siblings, that is locations that are children of the same parent. And you can filter by user ID and login, and all the others mentioned here. There are also new features regarding query types. First of all, now we have built-in query types. Ancestor, children, siblings, geolocation. And geolocation you can, for instance, use to get distances between two locations. related to content, which is used to retrieve the reverse relation to provide a content item or a subtree. So and maybe one you might use a lot is then children now, because you don't actually, when you, for instance, now we're going to list children of a location, you no longer actually need to build that query type yourself, as this is now actually built in. And there are a few new ways to use query types now. Now you can use them directly in templates, using the easy render content query and location query methods or operators, where you then provide the query type. In this case, it's the latest content, but you can then also use the built-in query type, for instance, children, as I just mentioned. You could put that in here. If you would use children, you will also need to give a parameter here for providing for children for what location, but that is possible. There is a box if you want to have pagination as well. And you will then need to provide a template which will then render the items returned by the query type. So you can all do, for instance, this children, or run any other query type directly from the template. No need for any configuration in YAML or PHP actually, if you can reuse a query type you already have. There is yet another way to use query types now. We have introduced the query field type. That is a field type you can add to the content type. So if you, for instance, have an image, if you have a gallery, which you want to show images, you might not necessarily like to put the images as a children, but you may. You can then create a new field type using the query field type, and you can then specify any query type you have built in or your own. In this case, we are using the children query type. You can also filter what kind of content object types you want to have in the result sets, all or images, or in bike rides in this case. You can give additional parameters to the query type. And the idea is now that if you in the cases where you think that you want to define the relations between in the repository model itself, and not by code, you then now actually then do this using this field type. For rendering this, you will still need some configuration in YAML to specify which template to use, as shown below. But besides that, you put in the relations to what you want to query in as a part of the content field type. Next thing is the universal discovery widget, which has been redesigned and rewritten with some new functionalities like filtered search. You can resize columns and add a custom sort order. You can edit directly from the UDW. And there is a lot of new configuration options, which I have listed in these slides. They are all there for reference. The slides will be made available after the presentations today. I will not go through all of the new configuration options, but at least one. You can now, for instance, provide the root location ID, so that if you, for instance, are adding, if you have an image gallery and you want the editors to add images as a relation, But you want to limit from where where editors can pick images from. You can provide a root location ID and basically a subtree where so the editor can only pick location objects from a particular subtree. There are ways then for controlling the sorting and other things here. There are now quite convenient ways to add tabs in the back office. For doing so, you will need to use the tab component. So you define a new service with that tabs component. You tag the service using the platform admin UI component. And you basically just specify where the template you want to which defines what rendering should be done when you're using that tab. And where you want to put that tab is defined by the group, which there are several groups available, so you can put tabs in several places, which is listed here in the documentation. Site Factory is a new thing in version 3. Sylvain just gave you a quick demonstration of this in the product update in the session in the business track just now. So if you didn't see that, I suggest you, and you don't know what Site Factory is, I would suggest that you take a look at that presentation once that is made available. It will also happen quite soon. So I will not demonstrate now actually what the Site Factory is and what you can do it from the back end, but I will give a short description of actually what you need to do of configuration in order to use it and customize it yourself. So Site Factory is used for having a multi-site setup in the very same AC platform installation. So that is that the user can, using the backend, create a new site, which will then basically use a subtree in your content. Yeah. And when you create a new site, you will need to choose based on some templates. So you can, for instance, if you want to have let the user be able to create new sites and a corporate site, you can create predefined templates for so that the design of the sites will look different and things like this. So in order to define these site templates, you do as mentioned below. There is a new configuration file called is the platform Site Factory. And yes, almost forgot to mention that site factoring is disabled by default. So you first need to enable it using the enable setting. And then you can use the template settings. And here we are defining two templates. You give each template a name and a thumbnail, which is shown in the backend when you get the list of available templates you can choose from. And you define the site access group. And the next thing you'll need to do is then to configure also the site access group as a site in the site access config. So that is in the platform YAML file. I just created two new groups, example site factory group 1 and group 2. That's the very same I mentioned in the slide before. And then there is a new site access matcher provided by the AC platform Site Factory. Because when you create new sites, you will provide the domain name used by that site, and it will use that to match the site access and also the site access group. But when you in the backend creates a new site, it will not do any changes to your YAML configurations. Instead, it will restore the mapping between the host names and which site access they belong to in dedicated tables, database tables, which are named is a site and is a public access. So this new site access measure is used for matching then the given domain name to the correct site. The final step in order to then define a new site template is to also define the design for it. And this you do with the normal easy design features. You create two new designs in this case, example 1 and example 2. Yeah, and then you do the mapping again to the site factory group that says that, okay, the site factory group 1 will use the design named example 1, and the group 2 will use the example 2, and then you can create the page layouts and other templates, which then will be used for the respective site access groups and the correct site. Yeah, so that is about site factory. There are two new features in the GraphQL as well. Previously, you could query content. We can now query also locations and children. Besides that, we have made it a bit easier to create custom field types. First of all, the APIs for creating field types is now stronger typed. And we have also created a generic field type you can use for, let's say, simple field types where you don't have any special needs when it comes to storing actually the data. So the generic field type will then take care of storing it in the legacy storage engine. But you'll still have to do a few steps. You still need to define the value objects, which says what kind of properties you want to store in this field type. You have to define the fields. For instance, every field type has a field type identifier. So if you have a text field, a text line, sorry, internally this one is called string. And if you create your own field type, you will need to then create your own identifier. The field type API also uses forms. So like when you're actually adding content in the backend, you're actually editing a form, a Symfony form. And the input the user provides there needs to then be put into the value object. So you need some mapping functions for dealing with this. And you also need to define a template for how to render this content field. Yeah, so a bit more convenient to make at least simple field types out of the box now in 3.0. We have made it some more convenience also to add custom twig variables which you can use in your templates. So they can be set either by site access or by content view. So in this case, I first create a static variable called my custom variable with this value called the variable value. You can also set them per content view, and you can also use nested variables. So in this case, I have my variable named my custom variable 2, and then it has two sub-items, content type identifier and content type name. And you can also then actually assign values to these variables using the expression language, which is a Symfony feature. You can also configure the twig variables a bit more advanced or completely dynamically. There are two ways for doing that, by variable providers and through the event system. So you can take the provider example first. You basically implement a variable provider. You find this as a service. Yeah, and then you have to overwrite this method and specify a custom function or method for setting the variable. And here you can of course inject Symfony services and in order to make the content of the value not only static but dynamic based on your certain criteria. It's also possible to inject the variables using events. Then you use the pre-content view event. So you will need to have a kernel listener, event listener, sorry, listen to the mentioned event, and just implement regular listener. Yeah. That was basically it. This is a short reference of what all of what I just went through, which will then be available for you as well in the slides.